I mentioned previously that the A201 basically goes along with the A101, and so now we need to take a little closer look at what the 201 has and some of its key provisions. As I mentioned, the A201 goes along with the other A-series documents that presuppose a design, bid, build, project delivery method. What does that mean? Basically what that means is that you can use the A201 when you're talking about design, bid, build, where the compensation of the contractor is a fixed price, or you can use the A201 where the design, bid, build, project delivery method incorporates a cost plus arrangement of compensation to the contractor. So it's used with the design, bid, build, project delivery methods regardless of which way the contractor is compensated, fixed price or cost plus. And the A201 has a lot of what we would think of as legal terms as opposed to commercial terms. Legal terms in the sense that they tend not to change so much from project to project, unlike the commercial terms where there's a different schedule, different price, etc. for each project. The commercial terms are in the A101, the legal terms in the A201. So what are some of those legal terms? We're going to talk some in this presentation and the next about the key legal provisions of the A201. We'll dig deeper into all of these later on in the semester. But the A201 basically describes in general terms the duties of the owner, the contractor, the architect, and the subcontractors, the main players in a construction project. And it spells out in a fair amount of detail what each party has to do. Now, while it's true that the A201 is one of the contract documents, it's part of the contract between the owner and the contractor, it will also be incorporated by reference into the agreement between the owner and the architect and between the contractor and its subcontractors. So the A201 governs a lot of different participants in the construction process. Not all of them, because there are other participants, lenders, for example, or suppliers whose contracts probably don't incorporate the A201, but it governs the main players' rights and responsibilities. So I want to focus on a couple of the particular areas that you need to know about in this presentation and the next one. Here we're just going to talk in this presentation about changes in the work and payments and completion. Article 7 of the A201 is what governs the payment process. You'll remember that in the A101 we saw that the owner is obligated to make progress payments. Well, how does that work exactly? That's the subject of Article 9. But in addition, I also mentioned that the A101 contemplates that there may well be changes in the work as the work progresses, so that contract sum might go up or down. The process for doing that can take a couple of forms. One is change orders, and change orders are basically where they're what we would in first-year contracts refer to as modifications to the contract. Okay, it's where the owner says, all right, you know what, instead of red paint, I want blue paint. And that's a change if the contract calls for the walls to be red paint and the contractor has to switch gears and have it be blue paint. That's a change to the work. That may or may not have an impact on the schedule or the price. If it does, then the owner and the contractor need to agree on what that's going to amount to. Right? For example, if the contractor's already ordered red paint and has people ready to put the red paint on, or maybe already has put the red paint on and needs to change that to blue paint, okay, it's going to incur some additional cost in going out and buying blue paint in addition to the red paint that it's already purchased and now is going to be painted over. It's going to have to pay more people to go paint that, or at least the same people, to paint over what they just finished painting red, and that may take more time. And so what contractors are always concerned about is the impact of a change on their schedule, because as you saw in the A101, they have to stick to a particular schedule that will put them at substantial completion within a certain amount of time, or else face the possibility of liquidated damages for delay. So if there's a schedule impact, that needs to be taken into account, and if there's an out-of-pocket kind of impact, going out and buying blue paint when the contractor's already paid for red paint, then that needs to be taken into account as well. So when you have a change, there may or may not, depending on what the change is, be an impact on schedule, and there may or may not be an impact on cost. But either way, all of that needs to get reflected in a change order, which is simply a modification to the original contract that's agreed to by both parties. Both the owner and the contractor agree, all right, yes, it's going to cost you X amount more to do the blue paint, and it'll take you Y number of extra days to perform that work, and so we will agree to modify the completion date by extending the date of substantial completion for 2 days and increasing the contract sum by X amount of dollars, whatever it costs you to go out and get the blue paint. And there may be some additional profit baked into that, that increase in the contract sum as well. Okay, as opposed to Section 7.3, construction change directives. All right, that's not a modification of the contract. What a construction change directive is where the owner and the contractor can't agree on the impact of a change. The owner says, I want red paint instead of blue paint. I've changed my mind. We're going back to red paint, so we have to paint over the blue paint you just finished doing. And the contractor says, okay, that's going to cost me X amount of days and Y number of dollars, and the owner says, no, I don't think it should. You already had the red paint, blah, 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 whatever the reasons are. If the owner and the contractor can't agree on the impact of a change, then the owner has the right under the A201 to say, okay, contractor, even though we haven't agreed on what, if any, additional time or money you're going to get, you have to do the work anyway. And the owner will issue, through the architect, what's called a construction change directive. And that means that the contractor has to proceed with the work and fight it out later about how much, if any, additional time or money it gets. And that then gets into question of disputes and claims, which we'll talk about later on, but just understand right now that there's a big difference between a change order and a construction change directive. A change order is where the parties agree on the impact of a change and memorialize that in a modification of the contract. The construction change directive is unilateral from the owner and simply tells the contractor, you will do this work, and will worry later about how much extra time and money, if any, you get. Okay, the application for payment process. This goes back to the whole concept of progress payments that we saw in the A101. And the way this process works is typically at the end of the month, or within X number of days of the end of a calendar month, the contractor has to submit an application for payment. And depending on whether the payment mechanism under the contract is fixed price or cost plus, the contractor has to submit different information in support of its application for payment. If it's an A101 fixed price contract, then the contractor has to submit an application for payment that says, all right, I've completed 5% of the work, so I want 5% of the contract price. And it's more complicated and detailed than that, but in broad strokes, that's how that works. On the other hand, if the pricing mechanism under the contract is cost plus. The contractor says, okay, here are my receipts for all the subcontractors' work and the suppliers' work and all the stuff that I've paid for and is stored on site, etc. And it adds up to X number of dollars plus whatever the markup is that the owner and contractor have agreed to account for the contractor's overhead and profit. Let's say 15% if we're being generous. Then contractor says in its application for payment, where the pricing mechanism is cost plus, here are all my costs plus 15% of those costs for my own overhead and profit, whatever that product is how much I'm asking to be paid this month. Okay. Either way, whether we're talking about fixed price or cost plus, those applications for payment go to the architect, who's the owner's representative. And the architect has the responsibility to determine, okay, is the contractor in fact entitled to the amount it's claiming? Has it actually performed 5% of the work, if we're talking about a fixed price contract, or has it in fact bought all these supplies, paid all these subcontractors and so forth under a cost plus pricing mechanism? But either way, those applications go to the architect. If the architect agrees with what the contractor says, the architect provides what's known as a certificate of payment to the owner, saying, okay, owner, I've reviewed the contractor's pay application, and I'm telling you that the contractor is entitled to the amount that the contractor is claiming. On the other hand, the architect may well say, no, I think you're actually only about 4% done, so I'm going to knock down your application for payment down to 4% of the contract price, and I'll certify that amount to the owner. And then the owner will pay the 4%. Or in a cost plus arrangement, the architect may say, well, yeah, you've ordered this stuff, but you haven't actually paid for it yet, so I'm going to withhold certification from a certain amount of your pay application, contractor. Now, obviously, this is the sort of thing that owners and architects and contractors sometimes get into fights about, whether the architect has properly withheld payment, or the owner may gripe with the architect behind the scenes in a way that the contractor never sees, that the architect is over certifying payments, pay applications that should not have been certified. But in any event, those again become disputes, and we'll talk later about how those get addressed. But this is the basic drill in terms of how the payment process works, the progress payment process works. The contractor submits a pay app, the architect reviews it and certifies it in whole or in part, and sends it on to the owner, who pays whatever the architect has certified. So the changes and the payment process, change process, managing that, understanding what goes on when there's a change to the work, which happens all the time, regardless of the size of the project, and the payment process when we're talking about progress payments. Those are two of the main areas that are addressed in the A201. In the next presentation, we'll talk about some more of from a big picture standpoint, what all's in the A201 that you need to get your mind around.